So, good evening, everyone. Welcome. This is the Bible Hangout. This is the Thursday night Bible study for Understanding Principles Church. I'm Reverend Sherri James, Senior Minister of this amazing spiritual community. We are in the midst of a really powerful series on the Hebrew Scriptures. We're using this text, A Student's Guide to the Hebrew Scriptures, by the Reverend Dr. Mary Ann Tumpkin. Now, if you do not have a copy of this text, you can get one. You simply can send me an email. You have a couple of options. You can go to Universal Truth Center, the church that Reverend Mary founded, or you can go to, you can reach out to Up Church, and we have some copies on hand. So this is an amazing text. It really should be like the first course or the first thing that you do before you actually get into the Bible, just to understand like how the material came together. It really gives a pretty in-depth overview, just so that you have a way to think about the material that, so that you understand, well, what's actually interpretation versus what's actually like in the text. And there's so many things that we have been told are in the text that are not in the text. And because we have never had a Bible literacy course, many of us in our lifetime, and we haven't had the benefit of a seminary education, we just don't have any way of knowing, okay, well, what part of this is somebody's interpretation and somebody's doctrine versus what part of this is actually like what's actually on the page. So that's what we're doing. And where we are right now, we're in the middle of talking about the great matriarchs and the great patriarchs. And the great patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And then their wives are Sarah, who becomes Sarah, Rebecca, wife of Isaac, Rachel, wife of Jacob, and Joseph. And did Joseph get a wife? Like he has the whole thing with Potiphar. He don't actually really put him with a wife. That's an interesting thing. I gotta bring that up to my teacher, Dr. Coleman, and ask him about that. He is like the only patriarch without a woman. Interesting. No, he has to, because otherwise, how would the people know? Yeah, he's the only patriarch without a wife. Okay, so there you go. That right there. Bible trivia. Listen, if you want to do some research, how come Joseph doesn't have a wife? Just bring that up and see what folks say. Anyway, what we're going to talk about tonight is Jacob and Joseph. So right now, we just want to take a moment to just have an opening prayer. We just want to acknowledge the power and the presence of God. That there is something absolutely mystical about this experience, and we open ourselves for the mystical experience of God to happen in us as we study the scriptures to understand what they actually say, not what we've been told that they say. We know that even in that is a lesson in training for us, and that there is spiritual import to this work that we're doing. And so we just open our hearts and our minds for a deeper revelation of God in and through these words. In the name and nature of Jesus Christ, we affirm that it is so, and so it is. Okay, the Jacob cycle. So this is where we're beginning, is with the Jacob cycle. Hang on, let me get my share screen. So we are at the top of page 27. The top of page 27. Now, I want you to notice a couple things. One, Rebecca is barren, like the other matriarchs. And this is like a running theme with the matriarch, that these women are barren. Okay, I guess I am. Hi. If you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. Otherwise, just be mindful of any background noise. Okay, so the Abraham cycle dealt primarily with fertility and offspring. Fertility and offspring is what goes in that blank, especially the passing on of the promises from father to son. The Jacob cycle, which is what we're going to start today, the Jacob cycle is concerned with the same issues, right? But it's told from a slightly different angle. So if there is more than one son, how should God's promise and the family inheritance be passed on? The Jacob cycle is concerned. I'm going to flip the switches for a second. So I want to just back up. So the 1 second. Right, going to take a break and be mama. So the Abraham cycle is dealing with fertility and offspring. And if you remember, what happens in the story is that Sarai is barren and she can't have a child. And then Abram receives a promise that he's going to receive an offspring, but they don't really know, like, okay, when is this going to happen? And so they're taking matters into their own hands. And one of the things that happens is that Sarai gives Abram her handmaid Hagar, and he fathers a child through Hagar, the child Ishmael, who becomes the father of the what we know today as the Muslim tradition. The Ishmaelites, who later become the Muslims. And then we have Sarah when she is past the childbearing age, where she actually does get pregnant. Thank you. Joy said Joseph's wife was Asenath. Thank you, Joy. Good looking out. Anyway, so the Jacob cycle is also going to address fertility and offspring, but it's going to do it from a slightly different point of view. And here it's going to address what happens if you have more than one son. How should the promises of God and the family inheritance be passed on? And so we see this power dynamic happen in this story with Jacob and Esau, who are the offspring of Rebekah and Isaac. The Jacob cycle is concerned with brother-to-brother relationship within the promise. So it's always clear, Isaac, that wasn't necessarily a hard one because Ishmael was a stepchild. He was not the child of the promise. He was not the child of the husband and wife pairing of Abraham and Sarah. Only Isaac has that distinction. There was no second son. But with Jacob and Esau, you do have that. Now, interestingly enough, as I said, Rebekah is barren, and Isaac actually pleads with God for a child on her behalf, and then Rebekah becomes pregnant with twins. And the scripture says that she has two nations warring in her womb. And so what we're going to get into the storyline of the Jacob cycle, and it starts with the birth of Jacob and Esau. It starts with the birth of Jacob and Esau, and this is found in Genesis chapter 25. And essentially what happens is that Jacob, who is the younger of the twins, is the one that gets the birthright. Jacob is the younger of the twins, but he's the one that gets the birthright. And there was an established tradition of passing on the birthright to the oldest son. In fact, Jacob is even, his name means supplanter, or the one who supplants. So it in his name is inherent the idea that he's going to take, and we know what happens in the story is that he cheats his brother out of his birthright, he tricks him out of his birthright. He takes advantage of Esau's hunger, and he offers him a pot of lentil stew in exchange for the birthright. And so Jacob's poor treatment of his brother Esau earns him Esau's enmity, and Jacob finds out, hey, I gotta get up out of Canaan, the promised land, and maybe go somewhere else. So the cycle of Jacob's story begins with the birth. Jacob flees from Esau with the blessing. So he has tricked him out of the blessing, and he flees from him because Esau is ready to beat him down. Now, Jacob, at this point, when we're meeting him, he is the complete antithesis to his father, to his grandfather, Abraham. So if you think about Abraham believes God. Abraham almost has kind of a blind faith. God says, get out of your father's house and go. And Abraham doesn't hem and haw, at least according to the story. He packs up and he leaves. Whatever God tells him to do, he does. Even, this is really interesting. So if you, in Genesis, I think it's chapter 18, God wants to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham starts negotiating with God on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah, basically saying, look, if you can find 50 men, will you save the town for the sake of these 50 good men? And God says, yes, I will. And he kind of whittles it down to where, look, if you can just find 10 good men, he's working down in units of 5. If you can just find just 10 good men, will you save the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah, even for the sake of those 10 men? And God says, yes. Of course, the messengers go there, Lot protects them, and when they get there, they realize, listen, ain't nobody here good. And they manage to get Lot out, and God destroyed the town. But what you see is Abraham negotiating on behalf of these unrighteous people. And then you contrast that in chapter 22, when God basically tells him to sacrifice his own son. He doesn't argue with God. He doesn't push back. He just packs up Isaac and heads out to make the sacrifice. So Abraham is like this representative of faith, of just, if God said do it, I know it doesn't look like it makes sense right now, but I'm just going to get up and do it. Jacob is always trying to make stuff happen on his own. He is a great contrast to his grandfather. Now, any comments? So Jacob at Bethel. So what happens at Bethel is that on the way east back to Mesopotamia from Canaan, where Laban resides in Mesopotamia, Jacob has an encounter with God. And it's at a place called Luz, or L-U-Z. Jacob lies down to sleep, resting his head on a stone, and he has this dream where he sees a ladder. And the ladder's feet are on the earth, and then it reaches to heaven, and there are angels that are ascending and descending on the ladder. In the dream, God appears to Jacob, and he reaffirms the Abrahamic or patriarchal covenant. He promises land, prosperity, and in addition, Jacob's own safety, his own personal safety, until he returns to the land of Israel. And Jacob is stunned. In Genesis chapter 28, verses 16 and 17, it says, Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is present in this place. And I did not know it. Shaken, he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the abode of God, and that is the gateway to heaven, referring to the ladder. The stone that served as his pillow, he then sets up as a cultic pillar, some sort of memorial stone. He sanctifies the stone with oil, and he renames the site Bethel, which means house of God. So what goes in that blank is Bethel, B-E-T-H-E-L, Bethel. But essentially, God is promising himself. Now, it is significant that even with being given that direct vision, right? It is God does not mince words. I'm not gonna make you guess at what I'm promising you. Jacob, so unlike his grandfather Abraham, is still reluctant to rely on God and his promise. And so he actually makes a conditional vow. He says, if God remains with me, if he protects me on this journey that I am making and gives me bread to eat and clothing to wear, and if I return safe to my father's house, the Lord shall be my God. Basically, I got you. I hear you. If you make good on all of what you do, then you can be my God. And so this stone, which I set up as a pillar, shall be God's abode, and all that you give me, I will set aside as tithe for you. So where once God had tested Abraham, it seems now that Jacob is almost testing God. Basically, if you can do all this, fine. You can be my God. Jacob stays with Laban, and we find this in Genesis chapters 29 to 31. So Jacob spends 14 years in the household of his uncle, his mother's brother, Laban. And Jacob learns that um, Laban has two daughters. Then Jacob beats them. Leah is the elder daughter, and Rachel is the younger one. And Jacob falls in love with Rachel, and he agrees to serve his uncle for 7 years for the hand of the younger daughter, Rachel. When those 7 years pass, Laban deceives Jacob and gives him the elder daughter, Leah. So Jacob, the trickster, right? Remember, because he tricks his brother out of his birthright, is furious at having been tricked himself. And in much the same way, we got this older and a younger sibling, one disguised as the other or wearing the covering of the other, just as he tricked his own father. But he is willing to give 7 more years of service for Rachel. Rachel, Leah, and their 2 handmaids will conceive 1 daughter and 12 sons, from whom will come the 12 tribes of Israel. But it's the 2 sons of Rachel, the beloved wife, the 2 sons of Rachel, Benjamin and Joseph, who are the most beloved to Jacob. Let me know if you have any questions on this. So the next story in the cycle is Jacob at Jabbok, or you'll see Jabbok, but remember the J is a German thing. The pronunciation in the Hebrew is the Y, Jabbok. So Jacob determines that he's finally going to leave his uncle and he's going to go back to Canaan. Now, there's one final remarkable incident in his life that occurs on his return journey. It's an incident that most readers associate with a significant transformation in his character. And this is when this is nighttime struggle with a mysterious figure who in some ways is representative of God. This struggle occurs as he is about to cross the river Jabbok and reconcile himself with his former rival and enemy, Esau. Jacob had sent everyone on ahead, his wives, his children, his household, his possessions, and he's standing alone at the river. And this is what we read in Genesis chapter 32, verses 25 to 33. A man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the socket of his hip was strained as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for dawn is breaking." But he answered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Said the other, "What is your name?" He replied, "Jacob." Said he, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and men and have prevailed." Jacob asked, "Pray, tell me your name." But he said, "You must not ask my name." And he took leave of him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, meaning, "I have seen a divine being face to face, yet my life has been preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping on his hip. I have a comment. Andrea says, "Wow, that's deep, Rev. I never saw the comparisons of trickery between Jacob and his uncle." Yes. So a lot of scholars see this story as an Israelite adaptation of popular stories of river gods who threaten those who wish to cross a river, or trolls or ogres who guard rivers and have to be defeated by a hero, making the river safe to cross. In its Israelite version, remember we said that if you've been here for the other sessions, you know that many of the stories that appear in our Bible, especially in Genesis, they are retellings of stories that already exist in other cultures that predate the Hebrew culture. So we know that these stories were influenced by those other stories. There's stories from Mesopotamia, from Egypt, from other areas of Africa that are influences, that are stories that have been taken and reworked before they are put in our Bible, or there are tweaks to the story. And we talked about that a lot with Genesis 1, Genesis 2, but also through essentially all of those first 11 chapters of Genesis. We see this here again. Now, in this story, it's a little bit different because in this Israelite version, this story is historicized. It's got this ideological function. It's associated with one particular character at a historical time. And it serves to explain why the Israelites abstain from eating the sciatic nerve of an animal even to this day. We also learn how Peniel gets its name. We learn how Israel gets his name. One side note, and I thought this was really powerful because, and I wanted to share this because those of us in New Thought know that we have been taught that name means nature. Name means nature. And I guess because no one ever really broke it down, when I came into New Thought, I thought that was actually like a metaphysical thing. But in doing this work, what I have learned is that no, literally in Hebrew, name means nature. Names are important in throughout the Bible, and what happens is that names encapsulate the essence of whoever is carrying the name. So naming something or knowing the name of something actually gives you control over or power over that thing. And that's why the stranger will not reveal his name to Jacob, because it would give Jacob power over him. And if you think about all the things that we talk about naming, if you remember in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, Jehovah or Yahweh brings the different animals to Adam to name them. And this naming convention gives Adam power over or control over everything that he names. And whatever he will not name, he does not have power over. Now, I think that that has enormous significance for us and for just when you name something. And we know that what you name a thing, so it becomes to you, right? So this naming power, it's realized you got to name something what it is, and when you name it, you get power over it. And sometimes what we name things that's more powerful than ourselves. And so the very power that we have to name it, we transfer to the thing itself and give it power over us. But anyway, I thought that was just fire. And I just had to like bring that up. Phyllis says that is so true. Yes. So the name of something somehow encapsulates its very essence. Knowing the name of something gives you power and control over that thing. And many commentators, now again, like I said, when I came into New Thought, it was the first time that I'd ever paid attention to Jacob becoming Israel or Saul becoming Paul, but meaning, it's not like I didn't know this, but it didn't have the meaning that we talk about, because for us, it's always about this change in consciousness. And so much of what we teach in New Thought is about changing consciousness, is about gaining a new name, whatever that is, but it's coming from where we were and turning into who we're meant to be. And in that, a name change happened, right? So it was the first time I'd been in a church with that or teaching where that was really important. But I assumed that the way that we were interpreting it was the metaphysical interpretation of it. And I am learning in this study that that is not the case. That's just what it is. And then it took me back to just things that I read about Fillmore and just understanding what New Thought was getting at. That what metaphysics was seeking to do was to try to get back to the original teaching. It was that we've got this God that's behaving in capricious ways and in ways that are inconsistent from book to book inside the Bible. And what we have to have a way to do with it. And maybe it isn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Maybe it is this metaphysical interpretation. And so metaphysics always turns on the literal definitions of the word. So if you go and you look up any word in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, you're going to see what does the word literally mean, and then how does the element, the person, the place, or thing function in the story. And then the metaphysical meaning is crafted from the literal meaning of the word and the function that it has in the story, and it's some combination of that. So water then is potential, because in a story, the water has potential to do, it could be good, could be bad. It doesn't, the water is not necessarily the same in every story. Or hands or feet, or feet are on the ground and they represent your foundation. And so feet then are your understanding. So it's what does it literally mean and how does it function in the story? And then you marry those two together, and that's how they came up with these metaphysical definitions. So that means that even if you are looking at a word that you cannot find in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, you cannot find in the Revealing Word, just using that formula, you can create your own metaphysical definition. Because you got to trace the etymology back to the original meaning of the word, and then look at what's happening in the story with the way that the word is used. How's it functioning in the story? Got some comments. Constance says, wow, 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 beautiful truth. Yes. Andrea says, yes, there's power in the spoken word. Whatever we name it, so it is. Yelena says, names are highly important in my culture too. Awesome. Andrea, second principle of Kwanzaa, Kuchi Chagalia. Yes. To name and define ourselves. Yes, yes, yes. What you call it gives you power over it. So whatever it is that you're going through, name it something that you can do something about. All right, I gotta keep going because we got a lot to get through. Okay. Okay, so many commentators have observed that the change in name, it accompanies a change in character, a change in essence in Israel. And so the struggle with the angel is the final purging of the unsavory qualities of the character that marked Jacob's past. So although Jacob appears to be something of an anti-hero, he literally limps into the promised land alone. He's actually a new and honest man. And then we see that with the reconciliation with his brother. So in Genesis chapter 33, Jacob and Esau are reconciled. Jacob and Esau reconcile. So he greets his former rival and enemy with these words from Genesis chapter 33, verses 10 and 11. If you would do me this favor, accept from me this gift, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God, and you have received me favorably. Please accept my present, which has been brought to you, for God has favored me, and I have plenty. And when he urged him, he accepted. You can turn the page. We won't spend any time on this one, but I want to fill in the blank for you for number 7 at the top of page 28. Jacob and Shechem. What we're seeing here in this story in the Jacob cycle is conflict over marriage. Conflict over marriage. We won't spend any time with it because I want to jump into the Joseph cycle. I want to spend time with that. Andrea says, I am naming all apparent chaos divine and in order. There is no confusion in God. Amen. Yes. All right. The rest of Genesis relates the story of Joseph and his brothers, the 12 sons of Jacob. It is one of the most significant psychological dramas in our Bible. The story is intensely human. We don't have a lot of supernatural interference in this story. It focuses very much on the family relationship, on the jealousies, with very little reference to a divine perspective. You should notice that. So remember, in the Jacob cycle, even in the Abraham cycle, we've got all this interaction with God, So with the Jacob cycle, we've got God coming to him in the dream. He's got the ascending and the angels ascending and descending on a ladder. We have him wrestling with the divine being that strikes him in the hip socket. With Abraham, we've got the command from God to leave your home and to head out. We got him interacting with God on behalf of Sodom and Gomorrah. We've got him moving forward with the child sacrifice of his own child in Genesis chapter 22. When we get to the Joseph cycle of stories, it's like the divine interference just disappears. Like it's just gone out of the story. And so the Joseph cycle is a tale of family rivalry and providential deliverance. Family rivalry and providential deliverance. One of the important themes of these stories about Joseph is this idea of God delivering you. And the writer represents Jacob's sons, their petty jealousy, their murderous conspiracy, Joseph himself, all as unwitting instruments of a larger divine plan. In fact, Joseph says to his brothers in Genesis 50, chapter 20, and I know you know this verse, as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. Joseph's betrayal by his brothers, his descent into Egypt, set the stage not only for the reformation of his brothers' characters, which is an important part of the story, but for the descent of all of the Israelites into Egypt. So as to survive widespread famine. So yet another threat to the promise. God, every time God makes a promise, there's like this threat to the promise. People keep messing up, right? And so this is another threat to the promise, right, of the promised land. The threat of famine is overcome by the relocation to Egypt. Now, scholars are actually divided over the authenticity of the Egyptian elements of the story. Some point to the presence of Egyptian names and customs and religious beliefs and laws as a sign of some historical memories being preserved in these stories. And then others point to all the problems, the anachronisms, the things that could have happened when they said they happened, the general lack of specificity as a sign that these are composed quite late. The art of dream interpretation, which you know plays a lot into Joseph's story, was a very developed science in Egypt and in other parts of Mesopotamia. But the Egyptians were known in the ancient world as dream interpreters. Joseph is also known for his ability to interpret dreams, but the biblical narrator, the monotheizing biblical narrator, is very concerned to describe him as reporting what God revealed to him rather than relying on some kind of occult science of interpretation. So I'm at the top of 28. Joseph was the favored son of Jacob's 12. That's what goes in that blank, favored son. Joseph's brothers are jealous of Joseph's brothers are jealous of Jacob's partiality to Joseph, and they conspire to be rid of him. But at the last moment, his brother Judah convinces the brothers that if instead of killing him, they sell him, they can profit a little for their trouble. And so Joseph is sold and ultimately ends up in the household of Pharaoh of Egypt. So out of spite, this is what goes in that next line. Out of spite, his brothers sold him into slavery. And this is found in Genesis chapter 37. Genesis chapter 37. Now, Joseph actually rises to a position of greater power when he correctly interprets some dreams regarding an impending famine, and with Joseph as governor of the country in control of the grain supply. So what goes in that next blank is that, back up. Number 3, he ended up being a slave in an Egyptian's official house, that's chapter 39. Number 4, Joseph faithfully serves Potiphar. Potiphar is what goes in that blank. Joseph faithfully serves Potiphar, but wound up in jail after being falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. And that's Genesis chapter 39. Joseph faithfully served Potiphar, but wound up in jail after being falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. Joseph interprets, number 5. In jail, Joseph distinguishes himself by being trustworthy and in his ability to interpret dreams. And that's Genesis chapter 4. In jail, Joseph distinguishes himself by being trustworthy and in his ability to interpret dreams. Genesis chapter 40. So what you're seeing with this cycle of stories, again, is this Joseph has this ability and it's being refined over time. First, he starts out as the dreamer, but then he actually becomes the interpreter of dreams. So there is this refinement of this gift that he has, that when it first shows up in his youth, it causes him to be arrogant, it causes him to behave like a spoiled brat, and he eventually refines that gift, and he finds himself continually being thrown in captive situations. First, he is sold into slavery by his brothers, then he is put in jail after being falsely accused by his former boss's wife, then he's in jail, and he correctly interprets the dream of the baker who was for Pharaoh, and says to him, hey, listen, when you get out, could you put in a good word for me? Well, the guy actually forgets him in jail for another, I think, 2 years. So he's constantly in this limited, constricted situation, and being in that limited, constricted situation is actually what does the refining, puts him through the refining process that ultimately ends up manifesting the fullness of his dream. Number 6, Joseph interprets the dreams of Pharaoh and is appointed to a high governmental position. Joseph interprets the dreams of Pharaoh and is appointed to a high governmental position. This is chapter 41 of Genesis. Genesis chapter 41. Under his leadership, Egypt preparing for a famine. Famine is what goes in that blank, which in turn provided the occasion for a reunion with his brothers. Now, this famine strikes Canaan as well. And so it affects Egypt, but it's a widespread famine. And so it drives Joseph's brothers to Egypt in search of food. And Joseph doesn't reveal himself to his brothers. If you are familiar with the story, you know that he actually puts them through the paces where he tries to test them. He wants to know if they are the same men who so callously broke their father's heart by selling him, his father's favorite, so many years ago. And in the climactic moment in the story, Joseph demands that his frightened brothers leave Benjamin. Benjamin is the other son of Rachel, the other son of the beloved wife. He demands that they leave Benjamin as a pledge in Egypt. And Joseph knows, he knows that this is going to decimate his father Jacob to lose Rachel's only remaining son. But he's testing his brothers to see whether they have reformed since the day that they sold him into slavery. And indeed, Judah, the one who had figured so prominently in the sale of Joseph that had crushed his father, Judah steps forward and offers himself instead of Benjamin. He says, it would kill my father now to lose Benjamin, the last son of his beloved wife, Rachel. So the brothers, having proven their new integrity, Joseph weeps, he reveals his identity in a very moving scene, and ultimately the family is relocated to and reunited in Egypt, where they live peacefully and prosperously for some generations. So at the top of page 29, he, speaking of Joseph, forgives his brothers. Oh, I didn't think that. Not prophecy and hearing. That should say forgives his brothers. He forgives his brothers and invites them to come and live in Egypt. He forgives his brothers and invites them to come and live in Egypt. Amen. Constance says that was a powerful statement that you just said. Being in a limited, restricted position comes the refinement of the gift. I felt that and understand that and can see how it has played out in my life. Yes. It is always in a state of limitation that we are forced to be creative about our gift. And even when you look at like the life of Moses, which we'll get to next week, you're seeing this refinement of his gift. You see it first in what he's interested in, and then you see it in what he is. I'm gonna actually fix that. I think that could be that right. Forgive his. Okay. You see this refinement of the gift that comes always in a state of limitation. There's something about being in the restricted space that causes you to be creative and causes you to use your gift in ways that perhaps you hadn't thought to use it. So when Joseph gets to Egypt, he's very capable, but he's not really making use of his gift. He's in Potiphar's house. He is running the house well, and he is excelling, but he's not really doing anything with his gift. And he's still at this stage of not using his gift to serve humankind. And you know that because of the types of shenanigans that he's caught up in. Now, you should read the story of Potiphar with his wife. I know we have told the story like it was all her and not him. But the thing is that people don't out of the blue come and just, act out with you. You got to have an open door somewhere in your consciousness that allows that to be so. And when he leaves, what happens is that it's like his coat is left, right? His coat is left, or his jacket. His coat thing comes in like multiple times in his life. And his coat is left, and that's what she's able to use as evidence that he tried to force himself on her. But the other part of that is that you got to be close enough for somebody to get a hold of your coat. When you are about your business, you are unavailable for the BS. When you are about your business, you're unavailable for the BS. So, but it is him being in jail that all of the things that he could get into, he can't get into. All of the things that could serve as distractions from the refinement of his gift are not. They simply are not that. And we see the same thing with Moses, that when you are tending sheep and you are out there on the plain, you are not in the bustling metropolis. So you are not part of whole communities of people that are interacting. Like all the distractions have been moved away. And I think that's what happens in these spaces of limitation, is that all the things that could distract us, that could get our attention, can't, because either we don't have the means to get them, we don't have the opportunity to get them, but they are simply out of the way, and all we can do is work on who God called us to be. Andrea says, LOL, Rev, he had to be close enough for her to get to his coat and keep it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I know, we paint these stories and we vilify women in the Bible so much. Constance says, you are not part of the drama. Exactly. Work on your gift. When you are working on your gift, there is no room for the drama. None whatsoever. Okay, I fixed that. He forgives his brothers and invites them to come and live in Egypt. He forgives his brothers and invites them to come and live in Egypt. The issue of inheritance and birth order is recurring, in the ancestral story. The issue of inheritance and birth order is recurring in the ancestral story. They keep coming up. It is a partial, I'm reading the rest of what's on page 29. It is a partial explanation of the geographical and social realities. It is the writer's way of explaining the later preeminence of the tribes of Judah and Ephraim, even though they were not firstborn sons. Now, most of the narrative account in Genesis chapter 12 through 50, with the exception of the Joseph story, is assigned by scholars to the J source, and certain themes emerge in the J narrative. The first is that while God's promise is sure, the manner and the timing of its fulfillment is quite unpredictable. And you'll see this over and over and over again with the J source. The land never belonged to the patriarch to whom it is promised. Remember, the promised land is promised to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, but it actually never belongs to them. It doesn't come under Israelite rule until under the kingdom of David. Their descendants are going to take possession of it, but only after tremendous struggle. And then in other ways, God's methods are curious. So, one basic theological issue in the Joseph cycle is that God does not follow human convention when he decides whom he will bless. God does not follow human convention. So there's a term in the ancient world called primogeniture. Primogeniture. And it's an ancient Near Eastern practice. Primogeniture is spelled Primogeneture. And what it means is inheritance by the firstborn. And so one of the things that you see in the J source is that the means by which God is going to do what God said he's going to do is not, you don't know how. The promise is sure, but the when, the where, and the how, we don't know. And then also, why does God go against the traditional ancient Near Eastern practice of primogeniture, which is inheritance by the firstborn? He chooses Jacob, a liar and a cheat in his early life, over the elder Esau. Why does he choose young Joseph, who's an arrogant, spoiled brat? He provokes his brothers with his delusions of grandeur. We constantly see this, right? Ishmael is the firstborn son of Abraham. Yes, he's the firstborn of the handmaid, but if you look at the brothers of Joseph, they came from Rachel, from Leah, as well as the two handmaids for the women. And all of them are considered brothers. All of them are considered of the tribes, of the 12 tribes of Israel. So God is never sticking to human convention when he's trying to get his promise into expression. And you'll see this in the J source. And so it's a theological issue that these stories almost in a way are trying to answer. Why Joseph and not, I forgot who the firstborn is, not Gad. I can't remember the firstborn son. But the eldest son, Leah's eldest son. Ray says, speaking of Joseph, a little Bible trivia, per Dr. Rocco Errico, over 40% of the Bible is based on mysticism. The spectrum of mysticism encompasses dreams, visions, revelations, voices, acts of healing, clairaudience, which is inner hearing, clairvoyance, which is inner sight, and bilocation, which is out-of-body experience. Yes. And Andrea says the first will be last, and the last will be first. Yes. The first will be last, and the last will be first. Absolutely. But again, what we're trying to explain is that generally you have this passing down of the birthright. It was in the practice. This passing down of the birthright to the firstborn. And the firstborn got the blessing, and the firstborn got the birthright. But then you have the emergence. Remember, these stories are not eyewitness accounts. They're written looking back, right? And so you almost see the writer trying to deal with the fact that, so Jacob becomes the father of the Israelites, Esau becomes the father of the Edomites. And for most of the history, the the Israelites dominate the Edomites. So the person is writing the story in light of that reality, in light of that social reality. How do you account if the Edomites, who are the children of or the descendants of Esau, and Esau is the firstborn, what had happened? Right? It would be like, just to put a contemporary context on this, you've got Puerto Rico, which is a protectorate of the United States, but they really probably should be treated like a state as opposed to like a protectorate of the United States. They really probably should be the 51st state of this union. So it would be like somebody writing in the year 3000 trying to tell the story of why things look the way that they look in the relationship between the mainland U.S. and this protectorate, Puerto Rico, that is kind of sort of like a state, not quite recognized like a state, and they've got to explain that. So a lot of these stories that we're looking at, they're explaining existing social reality. If you go back up to letter C, this is what we said. We said that the issuance of the, let me go back. So the issue of inheritance and birth order is recurring in the ancestral story. It keeps coming up. And it is a partial explanation of the geographical and social reality. So that's what we mean by the geographical and social reality. That the Israelites dominated the Edomites. They essentially enslaved them. So how did that happen if the older brother is Esau? And so this story is part of explaining how it is that this relationship is set up the way that it is today. The Joseph cycle is also important because it gave the explanation of how and why the Israelites ended up in Egypt. It gave the explanation of how and why the Israelites ended up in Egypt. So again, remember, these stories are looking back and explaining how we got to where we are. They are not necessarily eyewitness accounts. They are not written by historians in the way that we write stories today as modern historians. There was not an emphasis on telling the story exactly as it happened, that there were deliberate embellishments in the story. If we had that in stories today, we would call them outright lies. And so it's very important that when we are reading our Bible, that we are not looking at these stories as with a 21st century mindset and thinking that the writers understood the world the way that we understand the world today. That we have to make allowances for the way that they saw the world and to consider that when we are looking at the text. That does not mean that we cannot get spiritual truth from the text. That does not mean that we cannot be inspired by and receive an anointed word from the text. But it also means that we should not pretend that these human fingerprints are not all over the book. Questions? Thank you. Reuben. Reuben is the oldest. Joseph's brothers, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and Benjamin. Yes. And only Joseph and Benjamin are from Rachel. The others are from Leah and or the handmaids of either woman. Question. Thank you for pulling that. Reuben is the oldest. So technically, Reuben would have gotten the birthright. All right. Thank you guys for tonight. For next week, we're going to, I think we have enough time. I think we can get through Exodus. We may have to divide Exodus into 2 parts, but I'm going to do my best to get through all of Exodus. So Exodus is pages 30, 31, 32, and 33. 30, 31, 32, and 33. So that's what we want to get through next week. If you are taking this class for credits, please complete class activity number 3. Please complete class activity number 3. And what do I mean by credits? Maybe this is your first time here, or maybe you didn't hear me say that before. This class is eligible for continuing education units. And so if you're interested in receiving continuing education units, what you'll need to do is to complete the class activities, and we'll have one final assignment when we get to the end of the semester. Class activity number 3 starts at page 112, 113, and 114. So it's a 3-page assignment. So, so this is dealing with the patriarchal history. The patriarchal history. So pages 112, 113, and 114, if you are doing this class for continuing education unit, it is free to do this class, so please let your colleagues know at your centers if they need continuing education units. I only ask that that you consider at the end of the class some type of love offering, just to acknowledge the time that it takes to grade your papers, to respond to them, and to when we do the paper at the end. But the class itself is free, and I know there may be people who need continuing education units, but may not be able to make it to POT or continuing education, or may not be able to pay for a college course in their city or wherever. This is a free offering, and literally, and the love offering is not compulsive. So honestly, if you said nothing, did nothing, it will be the same thing. You still get credit for the class. So please make the people in your centers aware of this opportunity. All right. Thank you for tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Andrea says, thank you, Rev. A wonderful lesson as usual. Andrea says, great stuff, Sherri. God bless all. Constance says, a lot of beautiful nuggets. We'll have to listen to this again. And you should too, capture your nuggets yourself. Yes, I should. Thank you guys for tonight. I will see you guys in a week. God bless.